our latest monthly APS Division of Biological Physics online event. My name is Nancy Ford, and I am the former chair of the engagement committee of DBIO. Just rotating off, but this is the last in the series that we planned over the past year before the term ended. So it's my pleasure to welcome everyone today. For those of you joining us for the first time at one of these events, I just wanted to highlight how you can learn more and get involved and so on. So let me just briefly share my screen to show you how to find us online. So this is the webpage for the Division of Biological Physics. It's very easy to find. You Google APS DBIO, and this is your top hit. And you can find links to a number of different things. And if you're interested in this type of workshop, you can click Workshops and Networking. And when you do, you see a list of all the events that we've hosted over the last 2 years. We haven't yet planned for the following year, so stay tuned and visit this website. But for example, if you're interested in, say, learning more about non-academic careers for biological physicists, we had an event on that in November. If you missed it, what's wonderful is that all these events are recorded, and so you can watch the recording of them on the APS YouTube channel. They're all linked from here. So this is a great way to find out more about a wide diversity of events that we've organized. And if you have suggestions of events that can be organized in the future, just reach out. You can feel free to contact me, and I'll pass the information along to this year's chair. So I'm really excited to hear about today's event, and I'm going to turn the floor over now to my colleague David Sivak, who has organized this, and he will be running the event.
Great, thank you, Nancy, and thanks everybody for coming today. So I'm David Sivak. I'm a professor of physics at Simon Fraser University, down the hall from Nancy. And we're really excited about this opportunity to discuss with you an issue that many of us think is of great importance: career and skills development when you're a grad student and a postdoc. And so basically our outline is we'll take roughly the first half of the hour, and we'll basically hear from each of our panelists with some of their about their background, about who they are, where they're coming from, and their experience as grad students, postdocs, and their general advice on these skills development issues. And then we'll open it up to everyone who's here for questions from you all. You're welcome to put questions into the chat or to raise your hand, and I can call on you to ask questions. So that's how we'll basically run it. So we're going to start with an initial question for our panelists, and so we can also get to know who they are. Basically, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, tell us a little about your background, and about some of your personal experience in developing future-facing skills as a grad student and a postdoc. And so we'll go around to our three panelists and get an introduction from them, and we'll start with Cynthia this time.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you today. My name is Cynthia Furman. I'm an associate professor in the RNA Therapeutics Institute at UMass Chan Medical School, which is right in the center of Massachusetts. And unlike the rest of my colleagues in my department, my scholarship and work focuses on the professional development of graduate students and postdocs and early career faculty. And so I innovate new approaches for that. I disseminate through national initiatives that I lead, and I study some aspects of this. And so I'm a biophysicist, actually, by training. I got my degree at UCSF studying low barrier hydrogen bonds using ultra-high resolution X-ray crystallography. So I don't usually include that in my introduction, but it's fun to share that with you. My fun thing was that when I was a graduate student in the 1990s and early 2000s, I had the highest resolution X-ray crystal structure that had been attained at the university. It was very fun. We could see hydrogen atoms and all the atoms and distinguish between oxygens and nitrogens. But I'll stop nerding out with you about that. But what I will share is that as a student and postdoc, I knew I had an interest in teaching and mentorship. And so I sought out different opportunities to get my teaching skills. And I'll say there's a variety of skills that I earned when I was a graduate student and for my short postdoctoral training. that I recognize now that I didn't even recognize then. Things like being able to work at the interface between disciplines, things like presentation skills and writing skills, how to write proposals. I write different types of proposals now, how to pitch to different stakeholders. So a lot of different things that I apply in my work, even though I've transitioned to focusing on graduate education.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. So let's turn to Prachi now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. So I'm Prachi Abasti. I'm a sort of been an academic my whole life, but I'm have recently made a shift. So I'm currently the Chief Scientific Officer at a company called Arcadia Science. And I've come there from my previous role as a professor of biochemistry and cell biology at Dartmouth at the Geisel School of Medicine. So I had a pretty traditional academic career path until I took a sharp left turn during the pandemic and decided to do something else. And I'm pretty much shutting down my lab in order to focus almost entirely on my company. Also the head of open science at a nonprofit called Estera Institute, where we move forward causes in open science that I really care about and try to make new solutions exist. So I'm now have been in the realms of actually hiring for academia and hiring for industry. So I have really shifted my own perspective and my own worldview on how to do things like that. And now have new light to shed on how I think about preparing for those types of things, given that I am looking now for, we're growing our company. We're about 50 now, looking to get to 150. So there's a lot of hiring yet to do. So a lot of discussion amongst ourselves and trying to figure out how to identify people and talent and understand like how we identify the skills that we need. So I can also speak from that perspective for what we might be looking for on the sort of other side of the aisle in skills and what it actually looks like to sort of demonstrate those skills. So happy to talk about any of those topics.
Thank you, Prachi. And now we'll turn it to our third panelist, Sarah.
I'm Sarah Schlobaum. I'm a little bit of an interloper here. I did particle physics rather than any kind of biophysics, but hopefully I'm still allowed. I did my PhD in 2011 from the University of Washington. I didn't find the Higgs boson, but they'll still give you a PhD about that as long as you say where it definitely isn't, which is what I did. I did all of my work at Fermilab outside of Chicago, which is a fantastic place. And I learned so much there about working with international collaborations and having to do presentations and all of those great things that some of the other panelists have mentioned. I'm one of the sort of 90% of PhD physicists who don't stay in academia. When I got my PhD, I moved to the UK actually to do what they call a graduate scheme, which is not as suspicious as the word scheme sounds to North Americans. It's a structured program that sort of teaches you some of these skills that you need in business. So that was a really useful stepping stone for me into business from academia, because there was still a lot that I needed to learn. Since then, I've spent my time going through sort of mostly as a data scientist, I'd say, throughout industry. I've worked for PwC, which is a large consulting firm. I've worked for HSBC, which is one of the world's largest banks. I'm now head of AI at a company called Citation, which helps small businesses with compliance. I have worked with a lot of PhD physicists. Actually, my boss is one. I've got one who reports to me as well. I think there are so many amazing transferable skills that you guys already have, and I'd love to hire more.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you for all those introductions. So now we're going to turn to getting into some of your perspectives on what is really helpful in thinking about training and developing your skills when you're a grad student and a postdoc. So the next question is, what advice do you have for current trainees on how to determine the skills that'll help you secure that next job and be successful in it? How do you find opportunities to actually develop those skills? And how do you balance actually pursuing those opportunities, or even integrate pursuing those opportunities into your sort of day job as a grad student or a postdoc, your research, your coursework, and your teaching? So we'll flip the order this time, and we'll start with Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I talk to academics about this a lot, and I think there are so many skills that you do have, you just don't have like the sort of business terms for them if you want to switch careers a bit. So if you think about, those presentation skills that I mentioned, that is so important. Absolutely any job you're going to be in requires good communication. I think some of the other things, if you think about, if you're doing a PhD, you're taking a long-term project from start to finish. There's an awful lot of project management that's involved in that. And I think we don't necessarily think of those terms because those aren't the business buzzwords. But if you read a job description and you think about, okay, what does that actually mean? And what am I actually doing that's transferable? So much of that is already there. And I think a mistake that I sort of made was to think that, oh, I need to go on a course and I need to do this. We're all academics. We all want to go on a course. We're all very formally minded about a lot of that. But so much of it, that's not where you really learn. Like, you don't need to take a course in communication. You can just practice communication. And there's absolutely no substitute for that sort of hands-on experience. I think that's my biggest tip, is to think outside the course list.
Cool. Thank you, Sarah. Let's go to Prachi next.
Great. Yeah. So I agree with everything that Sarah has said. And I do think that I've never been more convinced of anything in my life than that the PhD is a truly transferable skill once moving sort of sectors. It really, truly is the case that even now we are very much wanting to hire PhD scientists because not so much because of the degree, but because of what we know that they've had to sort of like learn how to learn new things, which is something that has to happen all the time, especially when you're in, other sectors and the world is moving faster than it's ever moved before. And all of us have to sort of keep pace with that. And so having the ability to sort of like learn those new directions, pivot in those different ways, it's extremely helpful to have that kind of background. I also think that one of the most important things you can do, and something I didn't realize until recently, and maybe definitely too late, is that we all have the ability to sort of like widen our worldview. I think I used to think that my world was big, that I sort of knew a lot of people and that I had very, connections in a lot of different places and interacted with folks from a lot of different industries. And that's what I thought was happening, and I actually am a big proponent of social media and things like that because it sort of gets us outside of our physical space and our local, interactions. But even so, I truly couldn't believe the degree to which, even that was sort of in my mind, now in hindsight, a little bit of a bubble of, the sort of an echo chamber of people who were in my situation or in some adjacent situation. And I didn't really know that many people. And now sort of having moved positions, just the people I come in contact with, the experiences that they've had, which we can definitely leverage and learn from all the time. So the same reasons that you find it useful to know people outside of your immediate circle, this is true, but can be even more broad if you get outside of your comfort zone a little bit and just start interacting with and on social media or whatever mechanisms, like following other people, interacting with other people. I think that's like completely invaluable because you start to see the ways in which other people operate and the ways and the skills that they develop and the insights that they've gotten from their own experiences, which is something that we're really good at getting from other academics, but we're not very good at like seeking that out from other places because it seems like it might not be relevant, but it's extremely relevant. These are, again, sort of very transferable skills. And I would say that I also really think it's very important to apply the skills that you're learning actively, right? So this is true for anything. You all know that in your own science, you can learn something, but if you're not applying it to anything, it'll, come out of your head instantly, or you won't have any way to really, sort of flex that muscle. And I don't know, I've taken countless trainings and, whatever it is. And I even remember when I was starting my own faculty lab, I had my own academic lab, I had taken as a postdoc, I had taken a lot of like, how to, run a research group and whatever. And I had taken like a similar course and one more intensive course after I'd actually started the lab and had my own actual problems to solve, and it was night and day. The first, I got very little out of the first training and I got a lot out of the one that was actually where I could take the lessons that I was learning and apply them directly to my life, and actually grapple with the real world challenges that would come up in those situations. There's actually no substitute for applying the things that you've learned and really saying like, oh, wait, I don't have to just like accept this wholesale, but what about this? And what about this? Because these are these situations that come up. So being able to take those trainings at a time when it's extremely relevant to your practice is I think, extremely important. And that's something I had learned even in the past, but that would be also the case. Now, maybe it's worth saying just one note about, things that are not as transferable, because I see the same thing also as well, where I sort of think of things I need to forgive to this whole audience, but where I feel like academic thinking is somewhat of a liability, is something also on the scale of like timelines, and just like and operationally, like executing on things. Like it is true that we have sort of like a during our training, we have, chunks of time in order to develop these skills, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to spend X number of years getting my PhD. I'm going to spend X number of years getting my postdoc. But, when you sort of like move into a very fast-paced environment where like things need to happen and a lot of people depend on you. And it's sort of like, it's all of us as learners tend to default towards, we're going to just like learn something new and like develop these skills over years. And it's like the time scale of that thing is like glacial compared to, in outside, you can sort of say like, oh, I can just hire that expert today. I don't need to sort of spend the next 5 years getting someone from zero to being proficient in something. I can hire someone today that already has that expertise. And so that is a thing where just changing the mindset into, being able to like execute quickly, leverage what you do know and apply it in ways that are maybe not certain, but sort of like acting on imperfect information and being sort of an operator that can get things done on like quick time scales is a thing that is something that we don't probably value as much or teach as much in academia, because it's a training environment. We have the luxury of taking more time to do that, but it's worth thinking about, getting into real world situations, internships, other things where you get experience in which you sort of see how culture and pace might be different than what you're used to. And having a little bit of that knowledge, I think of that as like a reduction in liability for me hiring someone, is like if they've had any experience in any environment where they've had to have a little bit of that culture shift, it's kind of like, not having to do that work once we hire them, so that's kind of one of the reasons why people really want like industry experience or something, because it's like someone else is that first experience for you, like you're not actually the first person to sort of teach someone how to change their mindset a little bit, because there's always a little bit of a steep learning curve on that front. So any sort of experiences that you can get to facilitate like a little bit of a culture shift from your current lifestyle would be, I think, advantageous.
Great, thanks for that perspective. And then third, we'll take it to Cynthia.
So what a great foundation. I love this. Some of the things that you've been hearing from Sarah and Prachi are, that there's so much that you're doing as a graduate student or a postdoc or biophysicist in academia that is transferable to other types of roles across sectors. You're also hearing about how in academia, you can take some time to build your skills. And this is a really good time to build your skills while you do have some of that time to do it in an intentional way that you might want to. But you also heard that you don't necessarily have to take a structured course or workshop to learn skills. That there's, to be honest, you've had a lot of education and training. So a lot of the skills that you're going to develop now are kind of more honed and refined. So you're probably going to learn on the job or from observing other people, or from looking at examples and teasing it out yourself, practicing and getting feedback. So I wanted to give you a couple of frameworks that and resources that I can connect you with to help draw together all these pieces that you've heard from Sarah and Prachi already. There's one other takeaway, especially that I wanted to point out, which was to talk to people and be curious about their future roles, so that as you're thinking about the skills you might want to learn now, you've been hearing examples of how people are using their different skills that they had developed in graduate school or postdoctoral training out there in their newfound jobs. And so kind of that storytelling and listening to people is really helpful. So the first resource I wanted to share with you is the concept of creating an individual development plan. And your campuses might already, or training programs might already guide you through creating an individual development plan, or they might not. But I'm putting into the chat links to 2 example tools online that you could use to help guide you through an IDP. And the value of having a framework like this is, when you're an undergraduate student or in a master's program, or when we were kids, when we wanted to learn something like a skill, we took a course, and that course guided us through learning new strategies, practicing and getting feedback. But at these higher levels of education, you're going to be kind of guiding yourself. And so it's helpful to make your own learning plan effectively with your longer term goals in mind. So both of these plans, my IDP, which I'm a co-author of, it's offered through AAAS, the organization that publishes science, and Chem IDP, which is offered through the American Chemical Society. Both of them are designed for high-level scientists who are wanting to develop themselves professionally. So those are tools that you can look at later. Another thing is, as I mentioned, as you develop your skills, you might kind of be tailoring your own development yourself. So this is an article that I co-wrote that might be helpful in terms of giving you ideas for how to set specific goals around your skills development at this level of training. The other thing I wanted to share you with is that there are some online courses and workshops and webinars available to graduate students and postdocs around some of the skills you'll be interested in learning. So I'm actually going to paste one more set of links, multiple links. So don't spend time looking at them now because they could be pretty distracting. There's lots of good content here, but capture this and save it for later. And I bet APS can post these links for you or send them to you. But these are a number of places. Some of them are biomedically focused and some of them are broad across all sciences or even other disciplines. But these different resources have a number of webinars and online courses and resources that can help you develop skills like teaching skills, mentoring skills, kind of mentoring up as a mentee, things around kind of project management around your lab or setting goals, a lot of different, lab management skills. So things like this. Again, a number of these trainings are kind of developed by academics. And so you'll want to think about how they translate into other different types of realms. And Prachi, you made such a really great point about kind of sometimes it's a mindset shift. The skills are transferable, but it's kind of the context or maybe the pace or other types of things that might be slightly different. So one way that you can kind of practice getting into that mindset, one is of course, talking to people in these different roles and asking them about how does that look different when you use that skill in your work, right? Compared to what I might be used to in academia as a graduate student. And in addition to talking to people, you can also practice these kinds of skills. So there's actually been job simulation exercises that have been developed by myself and others in the graduate and postdoctoral education community. We developed these simulations. A job simulation is a task that you can do that mimics a common task in a type of role or context. And we worked with people like Sarah and Prachi, who are employed in different types of roles to tailor shorter tasks that can mimic some of those common things that they do. So there's 2 libraries of job simulations that you could access to practice some of these things and see what they're like. You can use the Intersect library, which develops kind of more in-depth job simulations that tend to be like 8 hours long or so. And at UMass Chan Medical School, as part of our curriculum for our graduate students, we developed what we call micro sims, which are 1 to 2 hours per task. And both of these will give you examples about the mindset that you might need to be in as you're doing the task. Like Prachi, I loved your example of project management and timelines and timeframes and how important those are. In our microsim library, we have a couple of exercises where students are told, you're doing this part of your thesis project, but you need to, you have a lot of money and not much time. So you need to hire someone with that expertise instead. Who would you hire and make a plan for that? So these are some of the ways that you can take the things that you do in your everyday work as a graduate student or postdoc and get in that mindset and practice those skills of applying them as if you were in a different context. So I'll pause there, but I wanted to just kind of share some of those resources because they really seem to blend well with what Sarah and Prachi introduced.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. So our last pre-planned question here before we'll turn it over to the crowd and see what kind of questions you all have is what do you see as the most common misconceptions among students and postdocs about the whole issue of skills development? And we'll switch up the order again. So let's try going with Prachi first.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the maybe misconceptions is that, and this is true whether you're applying it to this problem or anything else. We have sort of mentors in academia, and I have always felt, and I know that people like Cynthia have been saying this for a very long time, have always felt that just because you have a primary mentor, putting all your eggs in that basket, like this is the person who will guide you through everything in your life, and no matter what aspect of your development that is quite a fallacy. And I think all mentors know that because they know they don't cover all of the expertise that students need. But really, just I've always felt that first of all, because you and your mentor are very different people and have different goals and have walked a different path, wear different shoes, whatever, that ultimately what you want is to sort of cobble together people who inspire you and that whose trajectory is informative, and cobble together like a sort of your own, whether or not it's forced upon you or not, your own sort of like pseudo committee of people that you go to and trust in your life to interact with and get information from. This is something that, and have that be, again, what an advisor really is someone you listen to so that you can make an informed opinion of your own. It's not a way to whack-a-mole and just try to do what everyone says, right? Like that's never been the thing. You sort of have to put it through the lens of your own experience and have that actually guide your perception, and have your goals, your vision, and your future sort of in your own hands, right? Like to grab that agency and let the expertise of others inform that, but not sort of be that no one's going to make that roadmap for you. So that's sort of generally a philosophy I've always had. But I think even so, more important when you think about all of the different career trajectories you might career paths you may be exploring, and how even your home advisors may only have ever seen one or a few of those. And so making sure that you start to aggressively go after and incorporate to cultivate the relationships that you might want with the others, and actually even know enough or learn enough or expand your circle enough with people so that you even know how to select a person. I think many people have gotten themselves in a situation where they have this idea or this goal and they wouldn't even know who to go to if they wanted, right? And that's partly because we end up in these sort of like small insular circles. So I would say that biggest misconception is to think that it is actually the responsibility of one person, even if they are your advisor or anything, to sort of guide that and be the answer to that. Only you have the answer. Each individual person, you have the answer. You want to be influenced by a number of different things, and the more you can identify where you want those influences to come from, and the earlier in your career, the better chance you have of cultivating those people that you really trust in order to be that input for you. So I guess that's more just like a philosophical thing, but does have like some real tactical sort of operational things in there to try and figure out like how do you make sure that you expand that circle so that you can have your own opinion about who you want those people to be.
Great, thanks, Prachi. We'll turn it to Sarah.
Yeah, I really love that. I like the thought of sort of having your own little board of directors for mentors with different skill sets. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's really good. I think, like I said before, I think a common misconception is that a lot of this stuff needs to be done formally. But, this ties into what Cynthia was saying, is that, yeah, you have to practice it. Even if you do take the formal course on the subject, you can't take a 1-hour course on communication. Great, now I'm an expert communicator. There's absolutely no substitute for practice. I think a common misconception that I see in people trying to sort of switch over and apply for jobs is that people often think that, like, if they read a job description, that's a list of requirements, and that's typically a wish list. Right. So there will be some things on there that you absolutely have to have, but there will be some things on there that, like, oh, well, well, look at this panel, right? It's for biophysicists. I'm not a biophysicist, but I still tick most of the boxes, and I can hopefully give you some sensible advice about this topic. So I still jumped at that opportunity. I only met 90% of the requirements, but that's okay. So yeah, if you're meeting in the 60 to 80% requirements range, as long as that's not listed as absolutely must have, take the chance, go for it. Skills can be developed, but you don't have to walk into everything perfectly formed as well.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And Cynthia.
I'm going to try to bring us home again. I'm putting into the chat some of the key things that I just heard, which were on my list too. So I love that. So yes, leveraging a community of mentors. Don't worry about all the skills and experience you have in a job description. And I'll add to that one something else, which is the kind of the myth or expectation that you browse a job description when you're looking for a job. Job descriptions can actually be really helpful for career exploration. So, months or years before you're looking for a job, when you're just kind of in the phase where you're curious about what kind of roles are out there, and also curious about skills to develop, this is a great opportunity to browse job descriptions and like highlight and notice. This is an exercise we do with our students in our curriculum. Notice what kind of skills, are needed. And then I think Prachi and Sarah also mentioned sometimes there's different language for those skills. So you might say, oh, well, project management, what does that mean? Do I do that? I think I manage my own project. How is that similar and different to what they're expecting in this kind of role? So those job descriptions can be a really great wealth of information and aren't just for job searching. And the fourth thing you'll see here is it's so valuable to really get to know your strengths. So I feel like in science, I'm really good at being critical about things. I'm critical about my data. I really poke holes at it. That's part of the skills that I have as being a really great scientist. But it's also, and it's valuable to notice the gaps that you have in your own skills. But I think we often don't place enough emphasis on really getting to know ourselves, and time in academia is a good time to do that, right? There's a little bit more breathing room there, maybe. Getting to know yourself, right? What are my strengths? What are my strengths when I communicate with other people, when I work on teams, when I work individually? What are my strengths and my skills, that you might see on paper, but also those intangible things. And we all, what are the lived experiences that I've had that I might bring to my work? What are the different identities, social identities? Like I'm a woman and I have kids. So I might see things in my future projects that other people don't because of those lived experiences in my life and world outside of my profession. So what are those strengths that you bring to various roles, and really kind of owning those strengths, getting to know them in yourself, and bringing them to what you do?
Great. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Okay, so at this point, we'd like to turn it over to everybody else to hear what kind of questions you have. So you can drop questions into chat and I can read them out. You can raise your hand, as we already have one person doing so, and I can call on you and you can unmute and ask questions, and we'll go from there. So it looks like first we've got Shannon McElhenney.
Wow, I'm really impressed you got that on your first try. You must know other people.
We've never met before, I swear.
Bastardized
right?
Irish names. But so you talk about it, a community of mentors, which is a very nice way of saying a network. But I find that there's very little advice given for people who do not have generational science in their families or in their communities for making these networks. I go to events about it, and the answer is essentially you should have generational science. Surely your family's in business. And then how does one go out seeking that network that gets you that internship when you have generational military and you don't have scientific connections?
Okay, who wants to jump in? We've got a hand from Prachi.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have several things to say about this, and I actually completely disagree. In fact, that we should have, some sort of like generational background and information. And I think the one thing that generational background doesn't have is that it didn't live in today's age of technology and the universe that we live in now. Like our worlds are all so much bigger. Like I actually think that a person today with no background and like connections compared to a person in the past with a lot of personal connections, we have a distinct advantage living in today's society with today's technology, right? So in my view, like I would say like 100% of my network is from sort of a cold network, either through social media, or one is like, what are networks that you can tap into that you already have? Other one is, can you make them? So one of the things I did as an early career faculty, so I sort of found that I was feeling extremely isolated and extremely alone. I went from being in a cohort of graduate students to like having other postdocs in my lab, and then going to a lab where I was sitting into my own lab where I was like in my office by myself, and I didn't have like, I'm like, what now? Like there was it felt extremely isolated and extremely lonely. And then I sort of realized that, wait a second, I'm grappling with the same challenges of every single new faculty person in the universe. I don't have to do this by myself. I started my own sort of like, global like Slack network for new faculty that ended up becoming, having thousands of people represented on like every continent except for Antarctica. And it just, it was one of those things where it was actually trying to solve challenges together from people. And this was not even like people's historical networks. I met everyone you know, that I knew from actually starting a thing, writing a blog post saying like, maybe somebody else needs this too. And then, you know, sharing that on Twitter and then having people just like sort of, and then throwing open the doors and having people come and say like, wait, I need this too. And sort of like, I think one thing is just like feeling like it's in your power and in your hands to try and make those connections. It's extremely uncomfortable. There's no doubt about it. Meeting new people, finding new people, you know, cold interfacing with people in ways, you know, that you're not comfortable with. Like, this is a thing that is hard for all of us. And I will say that I've always been continually surprised at the people who are more than willing, like if you just cold approach them and, you know, how willing they are to help. Because I think they have all been helped by somebody. And I just find, you know, and sure, like if you just think like the very worst thing that can happen, the absolute worst thing that can happen is you don't hear back from them. Like, and like, that's it. That's the worst case scenario, you know? And so I think even if you keep in mind that those are things that are like always in your power to do, and that we live in a better time today than anyone in the past has ever lived in order to like leverage these connections and, you know, connect with people that are not just in our immediate circles. So I think those are things that are like, you know, we have the ability to do that, but we can also be the solution by building those networks and those communities and those platforms ourselves.
I don't have intergenerational anything. I've posted a link in a chat that's actually really relevant to this, and it's a good networking story too. Because yeah, I actually, so this is from someone who now works for me that I met through my network. And so we had been part of the same, like we attended some of the same events. I admired some of the work she was doing. We talked to each other on social media. I wound up going on her podcast. As we were chatting about the podcast, she mentioned she was looking for a job. I happened to be hiring, and now she works for me, right? And that's how networking works. I didn't know anyone on the panel. I didn't know David before we got here. He just reached out over email and said, hey, it looks like you're doing some interesting stuff. Do you want to come talk on this panel? And I said, yes, because just like Rachi was saying, like, look, I needed this when I was younger. So I sort of feel like it's my responsibility to give back to the community that's helped me. And so many people do. And I think if you just reach out, yeah, people are so helpful.
Yeah, I think, I'll just share, I'll just add that I was first generation in science in my family. I now have a teenager, and I see the advantages that she has with having two parents who are scientists. But as a first generation scientist, I didn't realize until later in my career how much I kind of had to pave my own way, build my own social capital in ways that my peers who had family members in science didn't necessarily need to. But informational interviews, as was mentioned, that's just putting a term around like talking to people, right? And reaching out even to people who you don't know them, right? So the trick is, how do you talk to people who you don't know, right? So you just find a common connection that you have, like they're an alum of your research group or your program or your university, or you both, you know, some kind of connection, or you both know this person, and you can reach out to them. I put a link to one of many articles out there about informational interviews. And it's a low commitment way to talk to someone. It can be hard to meet people because maybe they don't write back, but that's okay. You send out invites and you expect people not to write back. And when they do, you know, right, you set up a time to talk. And it's just one conversation. But the way that I found additional mentors and such is, you know, through those kinds of conversations at a conference, through email or Zoom, whatever it is. Sometimes I notice in those conversations that our conversation just clicks. And that's a time when I might say, I don't say, will you be a mentor for me? That seems like a big commitment. They don't really know you that well. But I might say, this has been such a valuable conversation. I'd love to, could we maybe connect again in a couple of months? Because I think I'll be at this next phase, as we've talked about, and be really helpful to get your advice again. And then after a few times, you might end up starting to develop a mentoring relationship.
I think that was really helpful. As I said, I've definitely just gotten a lot of people. They're like, well, I already knew people.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for those thoughts. And just to echo what Sarah said, I mean, the genesis of this panel was I emailed a handful of friends of mine and said, hey, who would you recommend for this? And I did a little trolling online. And then I emailed 3 people that I'd never had a conversation with in my life and said, hey, you do cool things and seem to be very thoughtful about this. Do you want to come on this panel? And lo and behold, all 3 people said, hey, great. Sure, I will. I have no idea who you are, but great. You know, that sounds wonderful. So That doesn't always happen as easily as that, but it's the kind of thing that people do, as has been said, you know, either find this interesting or pay it forward from their own experience. And so I think that is definitely a thing. So we now have a question in the chat. This is from Hoda Taib, saying, in job descriptions, it's typically written that applicants need to have at least a few years of relevant work experience. Do you think there's anything we can do during our graduate studies to qualify for these jobs? I'll throw it open to the panel. Anyone want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of hiring, and I consider this work experience. Like, don't take that too literally. Your job description doesn't have to be, you know, if it says you need 2 to 3 years of Python experience, for example, that doesn't mean like you literally have to have a job where your only title is Python developer. If you've been using Python in your PhD to develop some stuff, that's often good enough. And if you just sort of reframe what you have been doing, okay, I haven't worked, but I have done this, it can tick the same box. Usually years of experience isn't, there's nothing magic about the number of years, right? If you just sit in front of a computer and do something really stupid and really basic for 3 years, that's not going to get you any better. I think it's just a rough guide of, okay, have you made this number of mistakes? Have you figured out how to do this? Can you work somewhat independently? How independently can you work? So don't take it too literally. Think about what you do have. You can also, so you can point to your academic career. You can also point to if you have any passion projects on the side. If you've like just gone and, I don't know, built some game that, I don't know, lets you play Battleship on your phone, or I don't know, something, right? You can, sometimes those can count as experience as well. And sometimes those are a better conversation starter than someone who's just run the same script for 3 years.
Sometimes the work experience years are looking for some career maturity. So again, kind of, you know yourself, you know what works well for you working in a professional field. Maybe you're very good at a certain skill if it's a particular years of experience with a particular skill, like the example of Python programming. Or maybe it's familiarity with the type of setting. Prachi brought up really great examples of how, you know, doing work in an industry setting or private sector might be very different from working in an academic sector. But I agree. I think there's lots of different ways that number of years of experience can be interpreted. And so if there's a position you're really interested in, and, you know, if they're saying 10 to 20 years of experience, that might not be quite the right fit. But also, if you bring a unique perspective, right, and a lot of energy and drive, and they meet you, they might end up deciding to then lower the, you know, change the job title to hire you, or, you know, you might be the right person for the position. So I think I would think a little flexibility about that. But yet that's true. You know, attain leadership opportunities, you know, through your campus, things to show kind of that you're a good communicator, working on teams, and have a fair amount of, you know, professional experience where you've had commitments and you've lived up to them.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, all of these are really great points. And what I would add, maybe I'll start with a little optimism, which is that, you know, y'all have some like serious advantages in being like young cutting edge practitioners of science, right? So this is a thing that, you know, as we get older and become like more sort of armchair generals, become less and, you know, more and more distant from like actually like the work of getting things done. Like these are and instead relying on others and training others to do it. Like these are things that you have like serious advantages when it comes to being at the absolute cutting edge of something where you are the one doing it, right? So that is something that absolutely is like crucial. And so these years of experience are a proxy, right? They are a proxy for some level of competency and skills and things like that. And that's a rough cut. All that means, it's not the substance of it, it is a signal of it, right? And so that means that what typically people are looking for is like some spikiness in skills and proficiency in some area. And that can be demonstrated, like Sarah and Cynthia said, in like a number of different ways. I love the idea of like passion projects and things like this, because it also shows initiative, like the ability to do things that you weren't required to do, you know, and like get them done. So like these are things that like all of them are very relevant pieces of information, and where you can actually highlight through substance, like where your spikiness is. And if that aligns with what those skills are, the years and the signal and the proxy for that is irrelevant, right? So you have a lot of advantages in being on that cutting edge, being a practitioner, and just demonstrating what that spikiness spikiness is in the way that you want to, that you can really tangibly say that, you know, and like, what is it that you've actually gotten done? What did you enable? What did you make exist? What did you build? You know, like these are things that are like really very important. And so trying to get yourself in the zone of like talking about that in a way that highlights the substance of what you've done and like how that contributes to your proficiency. And like what Cynthia said, I think self-awareness is extremely important. You know, if you are not someone with that experience, like where do you sit relative to others and your peers in this space about like level of experience and and can you highlight what it is that you're bringing to the table? Like those are things that you can work on, you know, getting the language around so that you are not discouraged by those you know, lists in those job descriptions, but really understand what they're asking for and see how you can match up, you know, your experience to that.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for all those perspectives. The questions are starting to come in faster on chat. So this is from Xiao Xiao Sun. All those suggestions and materials are very helpful. Exclamation point, 3 of them, I believe. Thank you so much. Question, how to help yourself for a smoother, successful transition from grad student to postdoc and independent researcher? Beside the mindset, any other skills that you must have for those transitions?
I'll jump in here. I've been involved with the program to support students. It's a national program to support students thinking ahead to postdoctoral training, and then potentially to faculty positions or independent researcher positions or group leads in companies. And I will say that when you're thinking about the student to postdoc transition, one thing I want to challenge you to do is think about, is postdoctoral experience the right thing for next step for me? Right. So when I would suggest that you think longer term, right? What directions might I want my career to go? And then talk to people and understand what are the norms for those roles. If you want to become a tenure track faculty member leading your own research group, you probably will need to do postdoctoral training. That's a probably. It used to be, you know, a couple decades ago that postdoctoral training really was essential if you wanted to get a scientist position in companies. Now, a lot of companies are noting, actually, after years of postdoctoral experience, now you're kind of really, really used to thinking like an academic and working in that setting, and you're less moldable. You know, for us, I'd rather bring in someone like Prachi talked about, like a young, energetic scientist, excited to jump into a new setting and learn how it works. And so it's common for people to hire scientists in companies without postdoctoral training. So really think about like, what is my gap in experience and skills from graduate student to the next step? And if that gap is really large, is there training like postdoctoral training that will help me, you know, kind of give me a ladder to that position? But really think of it strategically that way. Maybe the gap is more narrow and people expect you to learn on the job. So you might be able to jump into that role. It might feel like a big step for you, but they're expecting that too. And you're going to learn really rapidly on the job. So I think that's one thing to think about, is being strategic about the postdoc position that you choose. And if you do need postdoctoral positions, really thinking about, why am I doing this experience? You know, do I have geographic constraints? What do I want to learn? How do I want to grow in this position? And how will that really be the stepping stone to where I want to go? So being strategic about that.
Anybody else? Or we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, just fully agree. You know, I was just going to say that maybe, you know, also highlighting the fact that, you know, it is absolutely the case that you're going to learn anything on the job, and like trying to prepare yourself for a thing that you can't know is not actually you know, it can help you feel more comfortable, but you will always like learn those skills and actually have to practice them in real life. And so that really does hit home this idea of like making sure that you get a little bit outside your comfort zone. Any sort of thing you choose to do should be sort of like adding to your, you know, skills or competency in some way. It can be hard because we sort of say like, oh, this is where I'm comfortable, this is where I'm happy, you know, and like you sort of stay a little bit closer to your vein of like things that make you feel more comfortable. But it is, I think growth is very much, you know, happens through pushing ourselves, you know, in those different dimensions. So in as much as you can do that, and whether or not by getting other experiences. So like I said, some of it does mean like trying to experience different cultures and things. I did an internship in industry when I was in graduate school. So I was able to do that as during a summer. Not everyone it has that type of opportunity, but it is like one of those things where finding ways in which you can get totally outside your comfort zone, and like, and even if it's your postdoc, like making, it's very tempting. I don't know how many, as a PI, I don't know how many applications I got from people who wanted to stay pretty much in that wheelhouse, or people who thought were just like a little bit outside, where they're like, oh, I could learn this one other tiny thing, and so it really is not the same as someone really trying to like immerse themselves and completely expand their skill set, which is going to be very useful to you, because it really makes you more competitive and proficient at a broader range of things. So just get outside your comfort zone is what I would say.
Yeah, I left after the PhD. That was the right choice for me. I am probably more likely to hire a PhD than a postdoc, in all honesty. So yeah.
Great. So our next question is from Zhengyu Yang. Thank you for sharing the insightful ideas. I'm still a graduate student, and I always feel like there are always some work or excuses, for example, experiments in writing, that keeps me busy from other potential skills I might want to develop. Are there any skills that could help me find a balance between the tasks I need to do and the skills that I hope to develop?
I mean, if you're asking that, it sounds like you've got a good idea of what skills you need to develop, which is good. That's a hurdle not everyone gets over. I think if you go back, a thing that they teach in sort of business school a lot is the Eisenhower matrix of what's urgent versus what's important. And so if you think about everything that you want to do and plot that on a grid of what's urgent, what's important, yeah, you want to spend most of your time on what's both, but then make sure that you do carve out a portion of your time for what's important but not urgent. It's really easy to miss that.
Yeah, I was about to bring up the Eisenhower matrix until you did. And then, so one of the things I started in my lab, I did a career development week where every year we would basically say, you have, unambiguous sort of permission to just like stop all the other things that you think are such an emergency, so that you can focus on career development, and sort of had a giant like catalog of tasks and things people might want to do and explore, just to give them some ideas. But they would go off and do things, and we would gamify it and see like who sort of racked up points, and to try and like make sure they force themselves to like get into these different gain the skills and make the connections that they would need in the future. And I guarantee you, so that what that ended up doing. So I know that you all may not be in a situation where you can set that up for your entire lab group, although I think maybe many of your advisors may be very open to this idea. But and you can tell them this advantage, which is that I always found, by virtue of doing that exercise, to actually have people think very carefully about what skills they did want to develop and what they actually wanted to do. They came back from that week so much more invigorated and committed to their science and their work. Because they knew what they were doing it for. They remembered again, like, why am I doing this? And they were just completely refreshed and recommitted to the science in a way that I think accelerated their work, maybe by orders of magnitude. It felt like completely transformative. So it's a thing where we always convince ourselves like we don't have a minute to take away from like our primary work of science in order to do something else, but forget the ways in which actually committing to the purpose of that, it can actually accelerate our own work. And so that's something that you can think about when you're making your own time allocation, about how where you spend your time and how that might make you, progress towards your goals, but also help you communicate to others who might be expecting, that you spend every waking minute on whatever. Most of the time that's not the case, but if that is, then there is a perspective that you will be that much more effective in your science if you know what you're doing it for.
I love that so much. And I'm going to add to this, right? In thinking about your professional development, definitely fits in the category that Sarah raised, right? Important, but not necessarily urgent. And so one way that you can increase urgency is to tell people about your goals, right? So creating an IDP, which ends up, kind of doing some self-reflective processes, and then defining the skills or thing want to develop, or networks you want to build, or other ways you want to enhance your professional development, and writing those goals down, and then talking with mentors. Sure, maybe your research advisor, but additional mentors. Those people, then you're telling them, I'd like to work towards these goals. Do you have suggestions for me? Can you help me connect me to people? Can you connect me to resources? Can you be someone who can give me feedback as I'm working on this skill or that skill? once you communicate to someone that you intend to do something, and you can tell them, I'll check back in with you in 2 months, and I'd love to give you an update about how I'm doing and get some feedback and input from you. They might remember that, and that's one way to kind of hold yourself accountable. So we coach graduate students to build in these kinds of accountability plans. What are ways that you can hold yourself accountable towards working towards these important but not urgent professional development goals?
Great, lots of great points there. So do we have any other questions from our audience? We've had a lot of great resources that have been put in the chat already, but I'll give the panelists another opportunity, a final opportunity. If there are other sources of information, other guides to thinking about these things. This is obviously just a 1 hour conversation that we have, but obviously if people are more energized to read further or just generally figure out how to go about doing this, are there any other things that you guys, this is an open call, if there are other resources that you guys recommend, we're happy to hear about them.
I neglected in my introduction to share that the national initiative that I lead is called Professional Development Hub. And so I'm going to share this resource in the chat, which is a link to PD Hub. PD Hub in particular offers resources to institutions or organizations that want to enhance their professional development offerings for their graduate students or postdocs. So if any of you are in student or postdoc leadership groups or know of faculty or your programs that are interested in enhancing offerings for students and postdocs, that's a resource that you can point them to.
I just dropped also in the chat like a column I wrote for something or other that highlights the sort of career development week I was talking about, and I think it links lists of activities and things on there that I provided to the students. I often blogged about this. Every year I sort of highlighted like what we actually did for that week and what people did and how that actually synergized with their future career goals. And I think having this like conversation very openly with your fellow students and your advisors is really important. So one thing that I think people have this misconception about is that not being very transparent about, what it is that you want to do. One of the other reasons I did this is because people's career paths change, like their goals change all the time. Just because someone comes in wanting to do a thing doesn't mean 6 months later that's what they want to do. So making sure that you're very clear and transparent about what it is that you are thinking as of today. And I sort of encourage this from people in my own lab because, it's impossible to help someone get to a goal if you think it's something different than what their actual goal is, and so, and same thing for your, if many people are afraid to sort of say to their advisor, like, I don't want to do an academic career path. And I think that, professors very much realize like what the landscape looks like and are just willing to help in whatever it is that you want to do. And so to not be afraid of that and make sure that you put out into the universe what it is that you want, because not only are you going to help your advisors help you get there, but you will put out into the, I do believe very strongly that saying out loud what it is that you want helps you attract the kind of people and opportunities that you are looking for. And so trying to do that all within yourself is extremely difficult. So I would just really encourage you all to be able to find those people and resources by being very clear about what it is you're trying to do. And you'd be very surprised at who you attract and who's willing to help.
Absolutely. I think I'd echo that. I'd encourage you to use the resource that you already have, which is your network. And you think, oh, I don't have a network. Yeah, you do. You know people, right? You know your professors, you know the other people in the department, you know us now, you know various people, use things like LinkedIn. You don't have to say, oh, I know this. Like you can go to your advisor and say, hey, who do you know that knows about this area that I'm interested in? Who do you know that's really good at, I don't know, solving this particular type of problem? So I would encourage you to, like, now this week, think of something that you want to do, some goal you have, some problem that you're solving, and try and use your network to get there, as well as just thinking, oh, I have to really put my head down and just Google this and work really hard and do this on my own. I have made that mistake so many times. I'm still making it. Please don't do that. Please. So many people are willing to help.
Great. I think we are now coming to an end here. So I want to thank our audience for coming and for your great questions. I want to thank our 3 panelists, so Cynthia, Prachi, and Sarah. for sharing a lot of great insights, a lot of great perspectives, and I learned a ton today. So I hope it was similarly useful to other people. And a reminder that we recorded this, so the video will be available on the APS DBIO engagement website. That is, I guess, Nancy, can we drop a link into that as well to remind us? It was right at the beginning, but we'll put one more in. Yeah. So thank you everybody for coming today, and I think this will conclude our panel discussion. So thank you again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. So
Thank
great to
you.
meet you all.
Good luck, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was awesome.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Cynthia.
Thank you.
was-
I just
that-
have a habit of staying on until everyone else drops off.
I do too, in case there's any last questions. Yeah. So yeah, really appreciate it. That was fantastic. A ton of great resources, and yeah. So really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for your flexibility in scheduling this. It was nice to be involved.
Yeah.
So thank
Okay.
you.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.